Crime and deviance are a major portion of the news broadcast today. In this video, we plan to evaluate drug-related crimes in Rio de Janeiro and Chicago. We will look at the cultural influences that contribute to drug-related crimes for both these locations. We will begin by defining crime and deviance. While crime is defined as any action that constitute an offense punishable by law, deviance is any action departing from an accepted social standard. The sociology of crime and deviances focuses on how society defines and punishes these behaviors. Our discussion will begin with an analysis of drug-related crimes in Rio de Janeiro. According to the Overseas Security Advisory Council, the majority of the city's drug-related crimes are due to the illicit drug trade and those persons addicted to the illicit drugs. Street assaults, robberies, burglaries, and other criminal activities generate proceeds to support their actions. Brazil is the number 2 consumer of cocaine in the world, behind only the United States, as such a large proportion of crime is drug-related. According to the Center for Public Impact, there is an increased level of violence in Rio de Janeiro between rival drug trafficking gangs and the police. The city has a lot of officers that lack training and are underpaid, working in lower-class areas of Rio de Janeiro. In recent years, officers in the slums of Rio de Janeiro have been susceptible to bribes from the drug traffickers. Poor areas of Brazil, and Rio particularly, have been the source of drug trafficking since the 1900s. An increase in arrests in the early 1990s was correlated to an increase in urban violence and drug trafficking. These arrests and intense treatments for drug offenses, such as life imprisonment for drug dealers and the use of armed forces, lead to discussion on the deeper issues of drug use and punishment. In 2006, Brazil adopted a new policy to shift the focus of the drug problem to prevention and treatment rather than punishment. It does not include imprisonment, but subjects users to fines and community service. To reinforce this point, here's a video.
Nightline anchor Dan Harris traveled into the favelas of Rio and brings us this report tonight. Dan,
good evening. The very word Rio conjures images of sun and sand, but with the World Cup and the Olympics now fast approaching, police are scrambling to clean up Rio's vast criminal underworld. This is a war for paradise, and we went to the front lines. Just minutes from iconic beaches with names like Copacabana and Ipanema, there are massive shanty towns called favelas, most of which are effectively ruled by violent drug gangs. This is an open-air market. This is his bestseller. This is $5 American of cocaine. This, he says, is the bestseller. Complete with piles of color-coded drugs. I mean, it blows the mind to be in this place where everybody's selling drugs. No police, nobody's batting an eye, it's just business as usual. And this just keeps going and going. Is what's known as a crackland. It's amazing, there's just no fear of the police just smoking right out in public. In another crackland, this one the length of an entire city block. We got kids here. We found this 16-year-old crack addict. We wanted to go to the source of this misery, the drug kingpin. In a tiny room down a back alley, we scored a very rare interview with a drug lord, draped in gold and carrying a semi-automatic rifle. He demanded we conceal his identity. Given how serious the crack epidemic is here, do you worry at all about selling that to the community?
Eu me preocupar, cada cuida de si, meu filho.
Then he surprised us with a question of his own.
E se eu achar que eu tenho que te matar ou te sequestrar agora?
I took a moment to absorb this comment, and then the drug lord started chuckling.
Rio de Janeiro.
Now, as Rio prepares to host millions of sports fans, police have launched a war to uproot the gangs. But this urban counterinsurgency campaign is massively controversial because Rio's police have a long history of brutality and corruption. Just look at this video of a police helicopter firing wildly in the middle of a neighborhood while in pursuit of a drug lord. It's extraordinary video, and the police defend their tough tactics, but we met many people in Rio who said, point blank, they would rather live under the gangs than the police, and they have harrowing stories and even videotape of police brutality, and we'll have much more on that tonight on Nightline Dan.
Overall, when comparing the United States to Brazil, The US has a higher percentage of drug use in all categories. In Brazil, the drug that is used the most is cannabis. 6.9% of the Brazilian population reported using cannabis at some point during their lifetime, where 34.2% of American citizens claim to have used the drug. Poor minorities are much more likely to be caught and punished for drug use than their wealthier counterparts. They are also more likely to encounter unreasonable search and seizure and being framed for drug use. The issue of drug trafficking and punishment in Brazil is closely related to the economic status. With regard to financial status, many minors become involved in drug trafficking upon their first use, in which they are then pressured and threatened to pay their debts, stooping to robbery, assault, or murder to repay their debtors. These youths are very likely poor, not well educated, and therefore have little access to preventative services or healthcare.
The city of Chicago is one of the highest drug trafficked areas in the country. It's taken a toll on the city. Chicago has always been a stronghold for Colombian and Mexican drug traffickers, but in the early 90s there was a major surge in the influx of drugs, such as cocaine and opioids, thus causing an increase in drug-related crimes because this influx has done nothing but cause crime to continuously climb to the current day. In 2018, the crime rate of Chicago was a 469 on the City Data Crime Index scale, which is larger than in 94.4% of the U.S. cities. The major cause of crime in the city is the Mexico cartel's use of Chicago gangs as middlemen in order to spread and sell their products. These gangs include the Gangster Disciples, Black Beast Stone Nation, Vice Lords, and the Latin Kings. These gangs help the cartel move their product in Chicago and throughout the Midwest in order to gain money and power to further their enterprises. Obviously, we know that gangs are territorial in nature and have strict rules when it comes to borders, but we all know with money equals power, and with power comes greed. This capitalistic need for money and power have a huge influence on drug-related crimes by different gangs and gang members. Chicago gangs are not the only ones responsible for the drug-related crimes. Other crimes can be attributed to the effects drugs have on the people buying and using them. Drug consumption, drug-related crime, and drug deaths are all on the rise, and it doesn't appear to be slowing down in the foreseeable future. One of the many driving forces behind the extremely high Chicago crime rates have not only been the use of narcotics, but rather the lack thereof. Many a time, the reason these crimes are being committed is when people are lacking the drugs their bodies become accustomed to, which leads them to commit atrocious acts in an attempt to acquire the drug. Some of the most addictive and used of all drugs is cocaine and heroin. These prices are flabbergastingly expensive for most people, making it very difficult for someone to obtain. Since these drugs tend to be hard to get your hands on and are also incredibly addictive, it can cause people to psychologically break down and commit heinous crimes just to get their next fix. Now that we've discussed the situation of each city, we can begin to analyze the similarities and differences between the two in regards to drug-related crimes. When looking at these two graphs, you can see the levels of poverty and income between the two cities. Both show high levels of people living in poverty. When looking at the Chicago map, we can see the correlations between high levels of poverty and high levels of drug-related crimes. Due to people not having enough money for their basic needs, they need to look for easy and fast ways to make money. This turns people to selling drugs and getting involved with gangs.
To keep others informed about crimes happening in their area, in Rio, you can download apps that update in real time to help keep you safe. These apps have helped many by showing exactly what's happening and why. In Chicago, there are some apps. Those, however, have not proven to work well to help people in real time. In a 2017 study of Brazil, murder rate in the country was 30.8 per 100,000 people. Most of these crimes are from drug-related gang activity, while specifically in Chicago, nearly 50% of homicides and other violent crimes were related to drug violence. This shows how drug-related violence is a prevalent force that law enforcement is struggling to manage. In Rio, many police officers are persuaded to take bribes, knowing the gangs outnumber the police. While in Chicago, many officers are hoping government policies will enact change. As stated about Rio previously, they are focusing on pushing for prevention and treatment. Along with that, they are actively creating a police presence in high crime rate areas while pushing for a decrease in weapons. While in Chicago, they are taking a different approach. They want to focus on where the problem begins, which is with the children. They want to prevent them from joining gangs by pushing for better education and encouraging job training. This will cause them to have upward mobility and get out of poverty. These two cities show many similarities related to drug-related crimes, and they are both heavily related to poverty within the cities. However, the government's response to these high levels of crime in each city include many differences, and neither response seems to be effective as drug-related crimes are on the rise. Through our research, we have discovered that these two countries, however different they may seem, have many similarities with drug-related crimes. We have found that many of the same factors and pressures influence drug-related crime no matter where in the world it takes place. The same constants are impoverished minority groups that are being arrested and punished for drug-related crimes. In relation to these two groups, both see spikes in rates of murder as drug trafficking increases. It is apparent that there is a relationship with drug trafficking and other violent crimes with intensive punishment. We have concluded that the government's response to drug trafficking is as important as the laws that prohibit it. Stricter laws result in heightened stakes, more arrests, and more violence. Along with this conclusion, we can tie all ideas together by stating that by closing the gap of global stratification and by effect wealth distribution, we can begin to end drug trafficking and possibly prevent more deaths from drug-related altercations. As wealth is distributed more evenly throughout the classes, there will be a decline in the population who tries to gain endless accumulations of capital through drug trafficking. The working class will not feel that there is more wealth to be gained by working rather than participating in illegal activities.